Welcome back. So today's going to be my first DIY. We will be doing a transmission replacement on a short bench Chevy 1500. It's got a 5.3 with a 4L60, standard cab, short bed as I said. It's just going to be one that we run through the auction. So just get it in and out and see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and get started on this because I have a long day ahead of me. Of course, first thing you want to do is disconnect the battery. Alright, so on the top side of the vehicle, there's not really anything else you need to do other than I pulled the dipstick out just a little bit, but you can also do that from the bottom if you want to. First thing I do, pop off the rear U-joint drive shaft. I use an 11. I've always learned using metric. Sometimes it's not the right thing to do, but this distance, it works pretty well. Thankfully, I have the benefit of using a lift when I'm up at work. So that definitely helps me quite a bit. Alright, got the U-bolt straps off, U-joint straps, whatever you want to call them. And then after you get those straps off of the U-joint, I like to go ahead and prepare ahead of time. Make sure you get a pan right underneath of that front yoke. Right there. And then prepare yourself with, I use pretty much whatever I have. This instance I'm going to be using a sheet bag with electrical tape. You're going to wrap it around the transmission as quick as you can so you can lose as little fluid as possible and make it easier to maneuver around. So when you are prepared, go ahead and get a hammer or something heavy to start tapping. With this one because it's caked in mud. Obviously, I'm trying to reuse here the joints. I'm planning on replacing them. Before I pull the drive shaft out, I got these guys. Should be plenty. Now we're ready to get started on the trip. Alright, so normally the next step, instead of starting to work these bell housing bolts loose, would be to pop off the exhaust, but that cat's cut off. And this is cut right behind the cat. So I should have the room with the exhaust in place. I don't have to worry about taking that off. But to get that off, normally you'd have 3 nuts here. 1, 2, 3 on the back side. And 3 here. Definitely try to spray those ahead of time if you live in a rust belt area. And from that point, there should be a flange right around here. This has aftermarket exhaust from what somebody else made. So if you have the stock 2 cats, they run together into one pipe right around here. And there'd be a 2-bolt flange right here. You'd undo, and then to get the exhaust out, you'd actually have to move this cross member. So you just have to let those hang until you're ready to pull the transmission or jack the transmission up to drop the cross member. After you have the exhaust out of the way, next step would be go ahead and work with the starter. It is 2 bolts. I believe they're 15 mil. No, these are 13s. So 2 13mm bolts, one here Some of them are going to be right here and here. This one is going to be here, and well, I guess not there. That one's just not there. And then when I do transmissions on these, usually I'll just let the starter hang down because we don't need to fully remove it. And of course, this is the number one reason you wanted to pull the battery. You don't want these wires hitting anything. Oh, nope, I was mistaken. This does have the parallel bolt. But deep under here is another bolt. But you can't see it right now. So there's one bolt here and one bolt here on this starter. Alright, so the next step that I take is removing the torque converter. To do that, you want to spin the crank and hold it in place. Unlock the torque converter bolts, which I'll show you in a second. There's a couple different ways you can do this. You can find the right socket. In this instance is the 7/8, I apologize, 15/16. I'm going to use a ratchet and a socket. But you can also use a pry bar extension. Fit it right behind these ears from the underside and twist the crank like this if you have to, if you don't have a socket big enough. Now if you can see where this wrench is, there's one torque bottle button here. Some of them have 3, some of them have 4, some of them have up to 6. So this one has either 3 or 4, I haven't checked yet. So as I rotate the crank, you can see it turns a flex plate, which in turn spins that torque converter. So you have to hold the crank still with the socket or pry bar while you loosen this wrench.
You want to explain to me what up with the camera?
I don't know. Maybe you'll see on the channel. This is the way that I like to get them out. I interlock the wrenches for extra torque. Just like that. Make sure you hold the crank still while you try to crack this loose. Just like that. And as I just found out the hard way, make sure if you're starting to build compression, don't let this wrench slip and snap your finger on a really cold day. You gotta keep stopping and checking for that bolt. Oh, there you are. I believe this one only has 3 on this torque converter. Driver's side. So you can mix these guys together. Each side. Now when it comes to popping these connectors off, be extremely careful. A lot of people will glue them down. So if that is the case, unbolt the neutral safety switch. Sometimes you can just pop it off, but if it doesn't come out, you're gonna have to take a heat gun to it and pop it out if you want to take the connectors off, which is what I'm gonna have to do. Alright, as I said, sometimes you need a heat gun to get these off. In this case I do, so I'll do it again. So you gotta heat up the glue until you can pull it out. It's starting to come loose. Just try not to pull the wires too much. Metal connector. There we go, there's one. It's almost ready. There we go. Gotta pop out the speed sensor. This mount was already unbolted, so that's safe. Then you need to pop out the actual transmission connector. This is for the solenoids. Right there. Alright. So it sits on the transmission just like this. You pinch it here and here. There we go. So it sits like this. You pinch it in these sides. Alright, now we're going to get started on the bell housing bolts. These are all going to be 15s and 13s. The 13s are going to be, there's going to be studs off of the bolts. One of them is for your transmission connector, or I'm sorry, your transmission dipstick tube, which is up top. And on this side, there's a 13 holding on your transmission vent tube. Just loosen these guys. On this side, you have this one. There's one right above the starter. Let's see if I can view this. There's one right here, right above where the starter was. And the next one up is going to be your dipstick tube. And there's one more past that at the top. If you have a high mileage vehicle, it is very likely that the transmission has been replaced. And if you're lucky, the top bell housing bolts won't be there. If they are, I usually get those last. I'll support the transmission with the transmission jack, take the cross member out, drop the transmission down, and I get a long extension with the U-joint on there. So I'm gonna pop this out and show you real quick. So it looks like I'm actually gonna be lucky. Let's zoom in all the way. See if I can get a clear shot of it. Alright, there. That's where the vent tube usually goes. Right there. And somebody else left the bolt out. So that most likely both top bolts are out, so I won't have to worry about those. So for the upper bolts, I use a 15 on a swivel with a very long extension. Alright, and this one right here is for the transmission dipstick tube. So it looks like somebody just loosened the 13mm in the front and slid the tube to the side. But behind that 13mm, there's a 15mm stud. Alright, next is the transmission dipstick tube, which is right here. What I like to do, there's a little ridge on the dipstick tube. I try to get under it. There's a rubber seal right here. You don't want to tear that. I get underneath the ridge, the little lip on the dipstick tube, and I gently tap it until it comes out. There we go. And I Alright, this is another tricky part. So these tranny lines, it looks like you just unbolt them. It looks like the fittings unbolt from transmissions. They do, but trying to put it back in when a new transmission is in is a nightmare. There's a little plastic cover here that covers a metal pin. It's a little metal C-clip. And you pop the C-clip out and these transmission lines just pop out very easily. It's just hard to actually get to that pin. So sometimes it is better to pull the fittings out. Just make sure you put the fittings back in before you put the transmission up. Alright, so I got the top transmission clip off so far. This is what that clip looks like. There you go. I think technically it's called an E-clip. But that is what is holding the transmission lines in. Alright, so once you get those clips out, you should be able to just wiggle these out. There we go. There's one and two. Transmission lines are disconnected. The cross member, I use a 21 on one side and 11/16 on the other side. So obviously for those of you that do not have a lift and a transmission jack like this, the alternative ways would be to put the car up on jack stands. They sell small transmission jacks, which are phenomenal, but you still have to get your car pretty high off the ground. Otherwise, you're perfectly fine just using a big low-profile jack or one of the big Harbor Freight jacks that are about $100. Thankfully, like I said, I have this opportunity that I can use the lift for work, so it makes things go a lot smoother, a lot quicker. You're not fighting the weight of the transmission. So this transmission jack does not go all the way up, so I gotta drop the lift a little bit. first DIY. My hands are freezing right now. I'm going to go ahead and get the new transmission put in there so we can get this out to the auction and do it all again tomorrow. Thank you for watching.